The footage on screen right now was recorded in North Dakota in March of 2022. As you can see, it's fairly straightforward. Surveillance video of a family walking out of a convention center and into a busy parking lot. Now, most of the time when I show you something like this, it's because there's something in it that is pivotal to a police investigation, usually a small or hidden detail that is the key to solving that case. But this video is a little different. You see, the awful crime at the center of today's story isn't so much a whodunit. It's more of a howdunit. And by the time detectives saw this footage, they were already convinced that one of the people you're looking at was responsible, and that they could prove it. But even so, a part of them still couldn't believe what they were watching. Because while this surveillance video may not have solved this case, it was an incredibly valuable clue nonetheless. A shocking final puzzle piece that revealed the true depths of the evil they were dealing with. As always, my name is Nigel, I run this channel with my good friend Luke, and welcome back to Crime Zone. A reminder, if you do find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories told with a mysterious and suspenseful vibe. With that out of the way, let's dive in. The spring of 2022 was a period of big changes for Alexander Eckert. At just 22 years old, he had quite a bit on his plate. He was living on his own for the first time, he was balancing a full-time job and attending school, and most important of all, he was taking on the responsibilities of being a new father. Alexander, who went by Alex, was from Winter Garden, Florida, a city just outside of Orlando. He came from a successful family, and by all accounts had a happy and loving childhood. While we weren't able to find much specific information about Alex's early years, according to interviews we came across with several people close to him, from a young age it was clear that Alex was a guy of many talents. He was very smart and inquisitive, he was a gifted athlete, and he also had a way with people. Growing up, Alex was known as someone who was fun to be with and who enjoyed being around others as well. He got involved in all sorts of team sports, including baseball, football, and lacrosse, and always made friends easily. Thanks to his natural academic and athletic skills, Alex excelled all the way through school, and after graduating, he had a lot of options. However, what Alex wanted more than anything at that point was a break. He'd gone to a pretty competitive and high-pressure prep school in the area, so he decided to temporarily put college on hold. In the meantime, he applied and got hired at Disney World. This was originally only supposed to be a summer job type thing, but as is so often the case, life had other plans. Because while he was there, Alex unexpectedly met someone, a woman named Heather Hoffman. Heather was also working at Disney World. She was a couple of years older. Alex was 19 at the time and Heather was 21, but that didn't matter. As far as Alex was concerned, Heather was the complete package, so to speak. They shared common interests, she was smart, and she was attractive. In fact, she competed in beauty pageants when she was a teenager. Anyway, after meeting, Alex and Heather hit it off, and they quickly began dating. But the following year, Heather threw Alex a curveball. She didn't want the relationship to end, but she was missing her family, and she was going to be moving back home. And back home was quite a ways away. Heather was originally from the small city of Minot, North Dakota. Heather asked Alex to come with her, and after some thinking, he said yes. Alex also wanted to see where this relationship would go, and he was excited because Heather was from this big and close-knit family. Being a part of something like that was something Alex had always longed for and felt was missing from his own life, partially because his parents were divorced. Picking up and moving all the way to the other side of the country wasn't easy, but to those that knew Alex and Heather, it looked like they'd made the right choice, especially after they revealed some exciting news. In the summer of 2020, they announced that they were having a little girl. There was lots to do to prepare for the baby, but it appeared that Alex and Heather were doing well. They'd gotten a place together, and they'd also quickly found work. Heather took a job at the nearby Minot Air Force Base, which is also where several of her family members lived. Alex, meanwhile, got hired at a local big box retail store in the city, where he was soon promoted to being a supervisor. When the couple's daughter was born in early 2021, Alex and Heather couldn't have been happier. But for Alex in particular, it was a dream come true. As I said, he'd always wanted that classic family life, and he was ready to settle down and be the best father he could be. Unfortunately, though, it seemed like the stresses of parenthood were more than either Alex or Heather had bargained for, because within just a short time of their daughter being born, they began to face serious challenges in their relationship. And within 7 months, the couple had split up. So yeah, you see what I mean. Alex had a lot going on, and the last few years had been quite the roller coaster ride. But even though none of this had turned out the way that he had hoped, he was determined to make the best of things. His number one priority was his daughter now, and so Alex decided he would stay in Minot and do whatever he could to make the situation work. Of course, this was far from easy, but by now it had been about 4 months since the breakup, and Alex was getting back on his feet. He'd moved into his own apartment, he was continuing to try and move up at work, and he was even attending part-time classes in a business program at Minot State University. There's still quite a bit that needed to be worked out, especially when it came to how Alex and Heather were going to co-parent their daughter. But as far as Alex was concerned, it felt like things were at least heading in the direction of some kind of new normal. Sadly, though, that was not the case. Because while Alex was busy figuring out how to best meet the challenges and responsibilities that were in front of him, what he didn't know is that he was planning for a future that he was not going to be a part of.
911, what is the address of the emergency?
I just opened my front door and my neighbor directly across from me, he's laid out, bleeding from the head. It looks like he might have been shot or hit.
Okay. But he's not moving at all?
No, he is not.
Okay, we have units on the way to check it out.
The 911 call you just heard came into the Minot Police Department at 12:41 a.m. on April 22nd, 2022. It was made by a resident at the Wyatt, an apartment complex located on the northwestern edge of the city. The caller said that he'd gone outside and made a horrifying discovery. His male neighbor in the unit directly across from him was unresponsive on the ground. There was a pool of blood that appeared to be coming from his head, and it seemed like he might have been the victim of some kind of attack. When officers arrived at the scene, they found the young victim and quickly confirmed the disturbing situation. He was lying on his back, with his feet poking out just past the front door of his apartment. He was dressed only in pajamas, had no shoes or socks on, and there was blood all over his face. Sadly, there was nothing anyone could do. He was dead. Given the circumstances, police had to make sure that there were no ongoing threats, so before doing anything else, they went up into the apartment. However, the residence was quickly cleared. There was no one else inside. In fact, the place was spotless. The whole apartment was very clean, there didn't appear to be anything missing, damaged, or out of place, and there were no signs of forced entry. One of the few things out in plain sight was a wallet, which contained a driver's license. Sure enough, it belonged to the victim, who officers soon learned was also the person that lived there. It was 22-year-old Alexander Eckert. Alex's body was taken away for an autopsy, but almost right away it was clear that Alex had indeed been attacked. He'd suffered a single gunshot wound to the face, an injury that had likely killed him almost instantly. A .45 caliber shell casing was located not far from where Alex was found, and this was also collected and sent away for analysis. But other than Alex's phone, not much other evidence was recovered from the scene. Even so, it was fairly obvious to everyone that this was not a robbery or some kind of home invasion. This had all happened very fast. In other words, it was an ambush. And when detectives arrived and had a look at everything, they came to an even more haunting conclusion. They believed that not only was Alex specifically targeted, the person responsible was almost certainly someone he knew. Someone he wouldn't have thought twice about opening his door to. Of course, if that was true, it begged the question, why had Alex Eckert been targeted? Well, it wouldn't take long for investigators to uncover a potential motive. And it began when they followed up on another detail they noticed while searching Alex's apartment. I mentioned before that Alex's home was very clean, but something else that you may have spotted in the police body cam and crime scene photos is all of the baby toys and supplies around the residence. Well, this is something that also stood out to police. And when they looked up Alex's name in local records, they discovered that he had an 11-month-old daughter. They also discovered that there was an active custody case involving the child between Alex and the baby's mother, 24-year-old Heather Hoffman. Naturally, this caught their attention, so while some members of the investigative team worked on notifying Alex's loved ones back in Florida about what had happened, a couple of detectives went to speak with Heather in person. As I said earlier, several of Heather's family members lived on the Minot Air Force Base, and this is where she was now living as well. When police found her, she was at her sister Amber's place, along with their mother Diane. So authorities actually decided to talk to all three women at the same time. One of the detectives went off with Heather separately, while another spoke to Amber and Diane together. I should also mention that the detectives did not immediately reveal why they were there. After learning about the child custody case between Heather and Alex, they decided to start with some more general questions about that situation to kind of gauge everyone's reactions. We'll start with Heather because right away she painted a pretty dark picture for investigators. She told them that the reason she was embroiled in the custody situation with Alex was because she knew she could not let him anywhere near her or her daughter. Heather said that Alex was not a good guy. She stated that he was a heavy drinker, he used drugs, and that throughout their relationship he'd been physically, mentally, and sexually abusive towards her. For a while, she'd hoped that he would change, but when their daughter came along, Heather explained that things only got worse. She said the same sorts of things started happening with the baby as well, and that's when she knew she needed to get out. So she ended things between them permanently.
When I found out that he was hurting my daughter the same way that he was hurting me, it was kind of my last straw.
Sure.
I left. I'm slightly terrified of him, so I try to avoid him as much as physically possible.
Heather said that she'd gone as far as to file multiple abuse claims against Alex, and that these were currently working their way through court. In the meantime, she had custody of their daughter and tried her best to stay away from Alex at all costs. Understandably, this was disturbing to hear, and it was a lot to take in, but still, when it was finally revealed to Heather why detectives were there and that Alex had been murdered, she did seem genuinely upset. She was calm, but insisted she had nothing to do with this. She said she would answer additional questions and cooperate with the investigation in any way that authorities needed. As you might imagine, one of the first things police asked about was what Heather had been doing at the time Alex was killed. Heather said that she'd been at her sister's place the whole night and that she'd never left. She said that multiple family members could back this up, but she also gave detectives her cell phone, which had the Life 360 app installed on it. For those unfamiliar, Life 360 is a personal GPS tracking and mobile location sharing service. And sure enough, it showed detectives exactly what Heather said. Her location hadn't changed since 5:20 p.m. on April 21st, more than 7 hours before Alex was murdered. The other major thing Heather was asked about was whether she owned any weapons. Heather said she'd certainly thought about getting a gun, particularly because of her concerns about her and her daughter's safety. But no, she ultimately hadn't gone through with buying anything. Moving on to Heather's sister Amber and her mother Diane, they gave police very similar information. Their responses to the news of Alex's death were a little more emotional, but they essentially said that he was a bad guy who had treated Heather terribly.
So the reason why we're here is because Alex is dead.
What? Like he's dead? Like for sure? I don't like him anymore because he hurt my daughter, but oh my God.
In addition to confirming Heather's story, Diane and Amber notified detectives about something else that could further prove her whereabouts. Because they lived on a military base, in order to actually get to their houses from outside, you had to go through the base's gates. And not only were these monitored at all times, you were required to show ID anytime you entered. When detectives obtained the gate information, they saw that there was no record of Heather leaving or re-entering the Air Force Base the night that Alex was killed. So yeah, Heather had about as solid an alibi as it was possible to have. Her family members said that she was home at the time of the murder, her phone said that she was there, and the only way on or off the base was through those gates. That being said, Heather wasn't in the clear just yet. Detectives still felt that the custody dispute was a strong potential motive, and through talking to her, it was obvious she had a lot of animosity towards Alex. They wondered, was it possible Heather had gotten someone to carry out the killing on her behalf? And this theory got a lot more compelling when police learned another interesting piece of information. You see, even though Heather and Alex had only been broken up for a few months, Heather was already in a new relationship. She'd started dating a guy named Richie Cambites, and it was Richie who investigators went to speak with next.
The reason why we're talking about it is because he was found dead in the middle of the night.
Oh,
So you haven't talked to him or anything like that? You haven't had no issues?
no, nope.
Do you mind telling me where you were last night?
I picked up my kid from basketball practice
Okay.
and then went to my house.
And when would you say you got home?
I'd say 10:15.
Is there anyone or anything that can verify you're at your house all night?
Me and my kid.
As you just heard, Richie was arguably the most shocked out of all the people police had interviewed so far. And while he didn't have nearly as strong of an alibi as Heather, his son did corroborate his statements during a subsequent interview, telling officers that they were home all night after his basketball practice. Richie was also quite forthcoming with investigators and admitted that he owned several firearms. However, none of them matched the caliber of the weapon that had been used to kill Alex Eckert. With their two most likely suspects seemingly incapable of committing the crime, it was looking like police weren't in the greatest position. But actually, there was one more lead that they had to pursue. You see, during their conversation with Heather, she'd said something else that was interesting. It happened shortly after she was told that Alex had been killed.
I mean, I'm not surprised, but I still didn't want it to happen this way. I'm so sorry. There's a lot of mixed emotions right now.
I understand. It's a lot to take in. Who would harm him?
I don't know. Honestly, there's a lot of people in his life that are pretty sketchy.
According to Heather, Alex had been hanging out with a pretty sketchy crowd at the time of his death. She said she definitely believed that someone from either his friend group or the people he worked with could have hurt him. She wasn't sure about all of the details because she'd been trying to keep her distance, but she did bring up two names that she said police might want to look into. Now, that wasn't a lot to go on, but it was something, and things got a little more promising when detectives were notified about two new pieces of evidence. The first came when Minot police were contacted by a woman named Samantha Jackson. Samantha lived in the area and had called after making a startling discovery. While out walking her dog, she came across a handgun just lying in a strip of grass running between the sidewalk and a residential parking lot. It turned out that this area was only about a block away from Alex's apartment complex, and when detectives arrived, there was more good news. Not only was it a .45 caliber weapon, there were several unfired rounds still inside the gun. Rounds that were exactly the same type as the shell casing they'd found near Alex's body. The gun was still sent off for testing to confirm this, but police were almost certain they now had their murder weapon. The second piece of evidence was just as important. During canvassing efforts, members of the investigative team had gotten their hands on some surveillance video taken from a property just east of where Alex lived, and while reviewing it, they found something. The footage was grainy, but upon close inspection, detectives saw what they believed were two people heading in the direction of Alex's apartment complex at 10:18 p.m. on April 21st. This surveillance camera also recorded audio, and about 10 minutes later, it had picked up what police were confident was a single gunshot. 2 minutes after that, at 10:30 p.m., the same two people appeared again, this time heading back the way they originally came. This was obviously quite valuable in terms of narrowing the timeline, but it was also incredibly chilling. In addition to solidifying just how targeted this was, it meant that Alex had been dead for more than 2 hours before he was found. The video potentially meant something else, too. Remember, Heather had given detectives the names of two people who she said might be involved in the crime. And now, here police were looking at two unknown figures in this surveillance footage. So they had to wonder, was there something to what Heather had told them after all? It certainly seemed like that could be the case, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. You see, as police continued their investigation and they started to move on from Heather and her immediate circle, they began to hear a very different side to this whole story. Even after recovering the suspected murder weapon and that important surveillance footage, detectives with the Minot Police Department knew that they needed more if they were going to figure out what was really going on here. So they decided to follow up on the information that Heather had given them about the supposedly sketchy people in Alex's life. Specifically, they went to speak with those two guys she had mentioned, whose names were Dale Benelli and Jason Dugan. Now, Dale and Jason were both a little nervous when they were initially approached and questioned, but it quickly became clear that neither of them had anything to do with this. They had absolutely no motive. Moreover, the descriptions of these guys that police had been given, they were way off. There was nothing even remotely sketchy about Dale or Jason. They were just normal guys. Both of them denied having anything to do with Alex's murder, and said that actually they were quite close with him. What was even more interesting, though, was what Dale and Jason brought up next. While speaking separately with police, both of them said basically the same thing. Detectives needed to stop wasting their time looking into Alex's friends and coworkers. They were convinced that whatever had happened to Alex, it had something to do with Heather and her family. According to Dale and Jason, Alex had spent the months leading up to his death heartbroken and extremely confused. He thought he was in this loving and happy relationship, but out of nowhere, it was like an invisible switch had flipped. Heather was suddenly done with Alex, and she'd kicked him out of the place where they were living. As for the idea that Alex was abusive, Dale and Jason said that couldn't have been further from the truth. If anything, they claimed it was the opposite. Alex was just trying to be a good father and remain in his daughter's life, but he was being threatened by Heather and some of the members of her family, to the point that Alex had told them he was afraid of Heather. Jason and Dale were not alone in these beliefs either, because not long after their interviews, police were contacted by two more of Alex's friends, a pair of sisters named Tony and Danny. They said that they had heard some of the stuff that was being said about Alex, and they felt that they needed to reach out and set the record straight. For starters, Tony and Danny said it was completely untrue that Alex was a drug and alcohol abuser. They said Alex did not use drugs and rarely, if ever, touched alcohol because he hated the taste. But the bigger thing they wanted to dispute was what authorities had been told about Heather's abuse claims. They encouraged them to look further into the details of the whole situation because it was not what Heather was saying. Detectives did this, and upon closer inspection, they learned that all of the cases that Heather had filed against Alex were actually inactive. Despite her repeated claims of abuse, multiple investigations had found no evidence to support any of her allegations. This wasn't the only thing that Heather had mischaracterized either. She'd left out a lot of information, particularly when it came to the ongoing child custody case. In fact, it seemed the whole thing had started in the first place because Heather had tried to trick Alex into signing away his parental rights. I should mention the details here are a little fuzzy, but it appears Heather was successful in getting Alex to sign the paperwork. Apparently, though, Alex didn't actually know what he was signing because he was only given the last page from the documents. Again, it's unclear why he agreed to sign anything Heather gave him, but we do know that once he discovered what happened, he was horrified and immediately hired a lawyer. This meant that Heather had lied to police about having custody of her and Alex's daughter during their initial conversation. But it went further than that. Alex and Heather were supposed to be sharing custody, but Heather had been withholding their daughter and trying to supervise all of Alex's visits, even though the court had expressly forbidden her from doing so. According to Tony and Danny, it was when the case started trending in Alex's favor that Heather suddenly started filing all of those abuse claims, but the judge in the case wasn't buying it. So before his death, it was looking like Alex was headed for a major legal victory. So yeah, understandably, these were some pretty big revelations. Investigators had suspected since the beginning that the child custody dispute could be involved in this, but if Heather legitimately thought she might lose her child, that obviously put things on a whole other level. Of course, even with all of the signs pointing in her direction, detectives had a huge problem. Based on her alibi, it still didn't look like it was possible for Heather to have done this. But police also didn't have any evidence that someone else was responsible either. So if Heather was behind the murder, how had she done this? And what about that surveillance video that showed two people walking towards Alex's apartment on the night of the shooting? Well, as it happened, authorities were about to find the answers to both of these questions, and more. It started when they were contacted about two massive new leads that would finally unravel the biggest mystery at the heart of this case. The first new lead detectives received came a couple of days into the investigation, when they got a tip from an anonymous caller. That caller suggested that they reach out to a woman named Heidi Cook. Heidi was a colleague of Heather's. The two of them both had jobs in the administration office at the Minot Air Force Base. And as police soon learned, they talked quite a bit about their personal lives while they were at work. And Heidi was more than willing to share what she knew. Heidi said that when Heather first started working at the base, she seemed very happy in her relationship. She talked about Alex all the time, and when she would speak about him, it was almost always good things. It sounded like she really loved him, and she would say all sorts of stuff about how he was a great guy and what an amazing dad he was. At some point, there was that pivot, though, the same one that Alex's friends had described. Only, according to Heidi, this shift had not come out of nowhere. It happened when Heather started getting closer to Richie Cambites. Richie also worked on the Air Force Base, and that meant that he and Heather saw each other a decent amount. Heidi said they were always giggly and flirty when they were around each other, and the more time they spent together, the more Heather seemed to sour on her actual relationship. Before long, Heather had completely changed the way she was talking about Alex. Suddenly, he wasn't this great guy anymore. He was a monster. He was a drunk, a drug addict, an abuser, and, of course, a terrible father. When Heather broke up with Alex, her stories about his supposed behavior became more and more extreme, particularly as the custody dispute between them turned bitter and Heather realized she was losing. Despite this, Heidi said that initially she believed Heather. They had always been friendly, so she didn't think she had any reason to lie. But the more Heather's claims escalated, the less they seemed to add up. And this had been accompanied by some pretty alarming comments. Heidi said that in the lead up to Alex's murder, Heather had openly talked about wanting him dead. Even more unsettling, she discussed possible strategies for killing him and getting away with it, bragging about how she could claim it was self-defense, and even going as far as to practice what she might say to police afterwards. There was one other thing that Heidi told detectives that caught their attention more than anything, though, and it came when they asked her if they thought Heather was actually capable of carrying out a crime like this. That's when Heidi revealed that Heather had lied to them about something else. According to Heidi, she did own a firearm. She'd purchased it at a gun show, one that she'd attended only recently.
She was basically acting out what she would say if he was to turn up dead.
Does she actually have a gun or something?
I think she does.
What is that?
Because they went to a gun show not too long ago. She said that she bought one.
Needless to say, this was all pretty eye-opening, especially in terms of motive. But it was the other lead that would really get at the how in this howdunit. Around the same time the investigators interviewed Heidi Cook, they spoke with another employee at the Minot Air Force Base. This is actually one of Heidi and Heather's superiors, and they reached out to detectives because they wanted them to know about a suspicious piece of paperwork they'd come across. The document in question was a work order, one for April 21st, so the night of the murder. It stated that a maintenance technician had gone over to a home on the Air Force Base where one of Heather's family members lived, and had spent about 2.5 hours there that evening fixing a furnace. The computer system showed that the work order had been created by Heather herself. Now, Heather did handle paperwork like this as part of her job, but this particular document was highly unusual for a few reasons. For starters, the work order covered the exact window of the shooting, specifically 9 to 11:30 p.m. The timing of its creation was also a red flag. Instead of being issued beforehand, none of the paperwork had been generated until after the repairs were already supposedly completed, this time just 9 hours after Alex's death. By far the biggest giveaway that something was wrong, though, came when police looked at the maintenance technician listed on the work order. His name was Jesse Schroeder, and as authorities soon discovered, he was not actually on call that night. So yeah, Heather had forged this paperwork, and detectives had a theory as to why. But in order to confirm it, they needed to speak to Jesse directly. When police found him, Jesse did agree to an interview, but it was obvious from the start that he was holding back. He wasn't providing very much detail when answering questions, and he was visibly nervous. For a while, detectives weren't getting anywhere, but that changed when they confronted Jesse with the fraudulent work order. They asked him, why was Heather trying to make it look like you were somewhere that you clearly weren't at the time of Alex's murder? And that's when Jesse agreed to tell them everything he knew. Jesse admitted that he was with Heather Hoffman on the night of April 21st. The two of them were friends and they'd been hanging out when Heather asked him for a favor. She wanted Jesse to drive her to Alex's apartment. Because he and Heather were close, Jesse knew about the custody dispute between her and Alex. Or at least he thought he did. So he said he believed Heather when she told him that she just wanted to go to Alex's place to talk that night. Specifically, Heather claimed that this was her last chance to try and speak to Alex one-on-one before they had to go back to court.
I kept asking her, we're just talking, right? And she's like, yeah, because she was the only reason you're here is because in case he hits me.
After driving over in Jesse's pickup truck, the two of them parked nearby before walking over to Alex's apartment complex. Jesse said that when they got to the area where Alex's unit was, he hung back a little to give them some privacy, but he was still close enough to hear what happened next. When Heather knocked at the door, Alex opened up, and immediately it was obvious that he was not expecting her and did not want her there. When he tried to tell Heather to leave, though, she pulled out a gun and shot him.
When he opened the door, he said, "Heather, what are you doing? We're not doing this right now." I just stood there, and she goes, "Does it look like I'm joking?" And then that's when I heard the pop.
After firing the fatal shot, Heather took off and started heading back towards Jesse's pickup truck. Jesse said he was shocked by what he had just seen, but he didn't know what else to do, so he went with her. He confessed that he had driven Heather back home after the shooting, but he claimed it was never his intention to be involved in something like this. He insisted that when he agreed to go with Heather that night, he thought he was just being a good friend and had no idea what he was getting himself into. Like everyone else that was close to Heather, he'd heard all about what an awful guy Alex supposedly was. He never imagined that Alex was actually the one in danger. It appears that detectives mostly believed Jesse, but they asked him, if you really had nothing to do with the actual murder, why not come forward earlier and tell us this? Well, Jesse said that was easy. He was terrified of Heather. Jesse said that before they had even made it back to Heather's place after the shooting, she made a very ominous statement, one which he took to be a threat. She said something to the effect of, "That didn't go as planned, but at least I don't have to worry about Alex anymore. And I don't want to have to worry about you either." Of course, you might be saying to yourself, what about Heather's alibi? Well, this is the most crucial piece of information that Jesse had for detectives. He explained that when they left and returned to the Air Force Base that night, Heather was not riding in the passenger seat of his pickup truck. She was crouched down in the back of the vehicle so that the gate security staff wouldn't see her. This is why there was no record of Heather leaving or re-entering. It looked like Jesse was the only one in the truck, so he was the only one who'd been ID'd. This is also why Heather had forged that work order. In order for her plan to work, his whereabouts needed to be accounted for as well. Detectives theorized that Heather had further strengthened her alibi by leaving her phone at home so that her Life 360 app would make it look like she'd been there the whole time. As for her family members, they'd either been fooled by Heather or were simply lying for her. So yeah, this whole thing was chillingly premeditated, but it actually got worse. You see, like Heidi, Jesse also brought up during questioning that he knew Heather had recently purchased a firearm. He knew this because he said he was with her at the gun show where she'd bought it. And that brings us back to the surveillance video that I showed you at the very beginning of this video. The footage was recorded at the gun show in question in March of 2022, less than a month before Alex Eckert's murder. As you can see, multiple cameras captured Heather Hoffman while she was there, as well as who she was with. Notice something? Well, detectives certainly did. Heather had brought her baby with her that day. So not only had she been planning to kill Alex for at least several weeks, she bought the weapon she would later use to murder him in front of their daughter. If there were any remaining doubts about Heather's guilt, analysis and tracing on the handgun recovered near Alex's apartment soon proved that not only was this the weapon that had fired the fatal bullet, it was the same one Heather had purchased at the gun show. 4 days into the investigation, so April 26th, 2022, Heather Hoffman was arrested for Alex's murder. It appears this happened just in time, too, because as police would soon discover, just hours before she was taken into custody, Heather was looking at buying airline tickets for her and her daughter. Though court proceedings were delayed multiple times, the case went to trial the following summer. And when it did, Heather had a new story. She now claimed that it was Jesse Schroeder who had actually killed Alex, and that she was completely innocent. Plenty of people came to Heather's defense, too, particularly her family members. They continued to try and support her alibi, and her mother Diane even went as far as to claim that Heather had sold her handgun to Jesse a week before the murder, despite admitting she had no evidence to back this up. It was ultimately irrelevant, though, because prosecutors were more than prepared. They pointed out that Jesse had no motive for wanting Alex dead, and in addition to Jesse's testimony, they now had even stronger evidence obtained from Alex's autopsy. The examination and ballistics analysis showed that the bullet that had killed Alex had been fired at a significant upwards trajectory, meaning that he was almost certainly shot by someone significantly shorter than him. Well, Jesse Schroeder was 6'3", while Heather Hoffman was just 5'5". Perhaps the most damning part of the trial, though, was when the topic shifted to the ongoing custody dispute between Alex and Heather at the time of the murder. Alex's lawyer in that case, Kyle Craig, explained how devastated and scared Alex was throughout the legal battle with Heather, and reiterated that Alex had been tricked into signing away his parental rights. Of course, Heather's family supported her side of the story, repeating all of the abuse claims she'd made. But once again, prosecutors were prepared. They presented something that, in a way, allowed Alex to advocate for himself from beyond the grave. It was an audio recording that he'd captured about 3 months before his death, during a confrontation with Heather over their child custody case.
And you a month. Correct. Because that is what it takes to pay for this child. You are an irresponsible parent.
You didn't have to kick me out of the house.
Yes, I did. You don't need to be in the house to be responsible for your child. Now get the out of here before I break your jaw. You continue to fail her. How dare you sit here and tell me you love her? The amount that I do. When you can't even take care of her because you're irresponsible and selfish. Get out of here.
Oh, you just imagine.
Yes, because that child is worth more than your or my life combined, and you're failing her.
As you might imagine, this shed quite a bit of light on the true dynamic of Alex and Heather's relationship. And when both the defense and prosecution rested, the jury deliberated for just 2.5 hours before coming back with a verdict. They found Heather Hoffman guilty of felony murder. At the sentencing in March of 2024, Alex's heartbroken loved ones took their opportunity to finally face his killer. This included his parents, who in a lengthy and emotional statement pleaded with the judge in the case to put Heather away for life. During that statement, Alex's father, Ryan Eckert, said in part, quote, "Every night I kiss the picture of Alex that is etched into the urn, and I tell him how much I miss him, how much I love him, and how sorry I am. A smarter man than me once said, the murder of one parent by another is the ultimate act of child abuse. I agree with that statement, and I humbly ask the court that Miss Hoffman, a murderous child abuser, receive the just sentence of life in prison without parole." Despite everything that had been presented at trial, Heather still claimed that she was the real victim. She was completely unrepentant and continued to blame Jesse Schroeder, accusing authorities of fabricating the case against her.
Claiming he's stupid is the only way to cover why he is not also incarcerated in the discovery. He was told they'd rather him be a witness than a suspect, and coerced and coached him until his story matched the script. I am not the monster that everybody is painting me to be.
Heather's lawyers took a more diplomatic approach and attempted to advocate for a lighter sentence, owing to the fact that she didn't have any previous criminal record. But Heather's obvious lack of remorse did not go unnoticed by the judge in the case. In his own statement, he called out the lies and attempts by Heather and her family to escape responsibility for what she'd done, stating, quote, "Those efforts are continuing today. None of this was believed by the jury. This was an intentional, premeditated, planned attack that ended Alex Eckert's life. Heather Hoffman pushed a pistol into his face and pulled the trigger. This was a cold-blooded execution, and Heather Hoffman did it. There was nothing to excuse Heather Hoffman's evil." In addition to sentencing Heather to life without parole, the judge ordered that she have no contact with her daughter for the rest of her life, saying that he was effectively depriving her of being a parent in a similar way that she had done to Alex. I should say, though, it's unclear how effective this will actually be long-term, since according to the latest available reports, following the verdict, custody of Alex and Heather's daughter went to Heather's sister, who it seems still firmly supports her claims of innocence. At the time of this recording, Heather Hoffman remains incarcerated at the Dakota Women's Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in New England, North Dakota. This story is shocking for a lot of reasons. Not just because of the lengths that Heather was willing to go to in order to get what she wanted, but also because of how senseless all of this was. At the end of the day, this was over a child, one who could have obviously been raised by both of her parents, whatever that looked like. Instead, she now has to grow up without either of them in her life. Given Heather's lack of any accountability, it will likely come as no surprise to most of you that she appealed her conviction. She attempted to do this on the grounds that there wasn't enough evidence to convict her, though in late 2024, the verdict was upheld by North Dakota's Supreme Court. Of course, the biggest victim in all of this was Alex Eckert, who was not only deprived of his dream of being a father, but who had his entire future stolen from him. It seems Alex's family hasn't spoken much publicly about the case. We didn't really come across any interviews with them during our research, which, to be clear, is totally fine. Everyone grieves differently. But I don't know about you. I always like to hear the perspective of friends and family in cases like this, because I just feel it adds a more human element to these stories. Regardless of where they are, though, I do hope that Alex's loved ones have been able to find a little bit of healing and closure in the 4 years since his tragic death. Hey there. Before you take off, we'd just like to take a second and say that we really appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. Luke and I are so grateful for our incredible Crime Zone community, so thank you for being a part of it. If you want to help Crime Zone continue to grow, one of the easiest things you can do is leave a like on this video and consider subscribing. Be sure to hit that notification bell as well and select all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to support the channel, there are a couple of options. We've got a thriving community over on Patreon, where you can get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. Head over to patreon.com/crimezone to learn more and to meet some of the awesome people whose names are currently on screen. If that isn't your thing, we've also now launched channel memberships so you can join directly here on YouTube. Channel members get a lot of the same perks as on Patreon, including extra content, without the added hassle of having to go off-platform. Now, that being said, we know times are tough and that not everyone is able to support financially. Regardless of your situation, though, we want you to know that we truly appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much, and we hope to see you soon.